If you ever stumble across a town that isn't on any map, turn back. Don't investigate, don't film it, don't try to understand. Just leave. We didn't. 3 of us went in, only 2 came out. And even then, I'm not sure we ever really left. There's something in the trees near Melier, Illinois. Something that watches, waits, and whispers to those foolish enough to notice it. This is what we found. The idea to explore Melier came to me during one of those 2 a.m. research spirals that start with something trivial and end with you staring at a screen, convinced you've discovered a crack in reality. I'd been scouring obscure forums and defunct message boards for locations that hadn't yet been overrun by content creators or fake ghost hunters. That's when I stumbled across a thread titled simply, "Town in Illinois removed after 1984. The user was anonymous, no profile, no reply history, just one post. It described a place called Melier, located in the southern portion of Illinois, that had reportedly vanished from maps in the mid-80s. The post claimed no explanation was ever provided, no state records existed beyond that year, and no one seemed to talk about it, almost like it had been erased not just from documents but from memory itself. Something about that stuck with me. Maybe it was the specificity of the dates, or the strange name. Melier, like a forgotten surname or a typo that never got corrected. I'd been looking for something unique for our next urban exploration trip, and this was more than perfect. A town that had been wiped from state archives, a whole community that just stopped existing. It wasn't just a mystery, it was a provocation. Getting the rest of the team on board wasn't immediate. Dennis, our main videographer and my oldest friend, was easy. He'd jump at anything that promised eerie footage for his growing YouTube channel, especially if it involved remote towns and forgotten buildings. He was the type who kept his camera rolling even when things got too real. Victor, our newest addition, needed no persuasion either. His fascination with abandoned places bordered on obsession. He'd joined us just 2 months earlier, but had already devoured hours of old footage from our past trips, and was constantly talking about energy imprints and temporal residue, terms I usually rolled my eyes at. Rebecca, though, took convincing. She was the practical one, historian by training, researcher by nature. She wanted verifiable records, documented backstories, something she could categorize and annotate. Melier didn't offer any of that. All she had to go on was one cryptic post on an ancient thread. But that was precisely why it intrigued her, she later admitted, because it shouldn't exist and yet it might. We planned quickly. Supplies for 4 days, tents, dry food, backup batteries, offline maps, and a portable scanner for anything we might find in the field. Dennis loaded his SUV like a pro, fitting camera gear, drones, solar panels, and a stack of hard drives. I printed every map I could find of southern Illinois from the 1970s to today, comparing road changes, noting gaps, potential inconsistencies. Rebecca, of course, compiled newspaper archives and microfilm snapshots she'd dug up at the library. Victor brought his journal and, oddly, a bundle of red string and brass pins, just in case we need to map a pattern, he said cryptically. We left Chicago as the horizon began to bleed pale gold, the kind of light that makes empty streets look sacred. The city receded behind us, swallowed by concrete silence and cold. Caffeine. Dennis played his usual playlist, ambient synth and lo-fi beats, which gave the highway a dreamlike atmosphere. Rebecca sat in the back seat, poring over her maps, highlighting potential alternate routes in case the main access roads were blocked. I drove, focused but alert, watching the digital GPS pulse steadily as it guided us south. Last gas stop. For a while, Dennis said, pulling into a half-lit station near Carbondale. It was one of those old places with analog pumps and cracked windows, where the attendant watches you from behind dusty glass, like they've seen too many people pass through and not come back. Victor grabbed snacks inside while the rest of us stretched our legs. Rebecca unfurled a large paper map across the SUV hood. From what I found, she began, tracing her finger along a faint pencil line. Melier was deliberately removed from state maps sometime after 1985. The last trace I found was on a 1984 postal route listing, then nothing. No redirection records, no closures. It just vanishes. That's what makes it so perfect, I said, eyes scanning the tree line behind the gas station. I don't know why, but the woods already felt closer than they should have been. For the next couple of hours, the drive followed the usual pattern, interstates giving way to state highways, then narrowing to cracked county roads. Traffic dwindled. Cell service flickered. Houses became rare and towns turned into clusters of shuttered diners and half-abandoned churches. By late morning, pine trees began pressing in on either side of the road, their silhouettes thick like green walls. The GPS started to lag. Dennis tapped the screen as our location jumped erratically. "Glitching," he muttered. "Says we're miles off the highway when we're clearly not." "That's why I printed maps," Rebecca replied, already flipping through them. About 15 minutes later, she pointed to a break in the trees. "There, next right. It should be a service road, maybe gravel." It wasn't marked, just a narrow path barely wider than the SUV, swallowed in shadows. The road dipped and twisted like it had been forgotten by time and maintenance crews alike. The farther we drove, the worse the condition became. We slowed to a crawl, dodging potholes the size of trash bins. 20 minutes in, I spotted the first. Anomaly. An abandoned blue Chevy half hidden in the brush, its hood popped, doors wide open, windows long shattered. "Pull over," I told Dennis. Up close, it was clear the car had been there for years. Vines crept through the chassis. The inside had been stripped. No seats, no wheel, no engine. But it wasn't a crash. There were no skid marks, no dents, no signs of trauma. "Like someone just left it," Victor said, running a hand along the rusted roof. That's when we saw it. The first symbol. Carved into a tree about 10 feet away was a circle with rays emanating from its center, like a crude sun or wheel. "Look," Victor said, pointing to another tree with the same mark. They were subtle at first, then became unmistakable, a perimeter formed by these glyphs, surrounding the vehicle like a cage. "Probably teenagers messing around," Dennis offered, but his voice lacked conviction. We drove deeper, and we found more. 3 more cars appeared over the next hour, all in similar condition, all surrounded by trees bearing the same strange symbol. Each time, Victor got quieter. Rebecca took photos and noted coordinates, but the tension was beginning to show on her face. The forest seemed to tighten around us. It wasn't just the trees, it was the light too. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in thin, sickly rays, casting shadows that felt too sharp, too still. "No signal," Rebecca finally said, checking her phone. "GPS is out too. We're officially off the grid," Dennis said with a tight laugh. Still, none of us suggested turning back. The compulsion to continue was stronger than logic, as if we were already inside something that had quietly closed behind us. At one point, we reached a massive pine fallen across the path. "End of the road?" Dennis asked. "No," I replied, examining the drag marks in the dirt. "It's been moved before, just enough to let someone through." "Someone doesn't want visitors," Rebecca muttered. "Or they don't want people leaving," Victor added so softly I barely caught it. The road narrowed further, the trees now brushing both sides of the SUV like they were reaching in. No signs, no birds, no sounds beyond the tires crunching gravel. We were deep into nowhere now. And Melier, if it existed, was just ahead. We passed the fallen pine and squeezed the SUV through the narrow gap someone had deliberately carved through the forest barricade. That was the last real threshold we crossed. After that, it felt like we'd entered a separate world, one where the rules bent just enough to be noticed. Rebecca kept her eyes on the paper map in her lap, but even she was frowning now, double-checking our route like it didn't quite match what she'd studied. "The path is still here," she said. "But it wasn't supposed to twist this much." The forest had become unnaturally dense. Trees leaned inward like they'd grown that way on purpose, forming a kind of skeletal canopy overhead. The sunlight filtered through in jagged, cold shafts. Dennis kept both hands on the wheel, gripping it tight as the tires rolled over a road that had ceased being a road. It was just packed dirt now, interrupted by roots, ruts and stones that scraped the SUV's undercarriage. Victor had gone silent in the front passenger seat. His journal was open on his lap, pen twitching in his hand as he sketched something without looking down. Rebecca leaned forward from the back. "What are you drawing?" she asked. Victor didn't answer right away. He kept tracing the same shape again and again, a circle with thin lines radiating outward, like the symbols carved into the trees around the abandoned cars. "They're everywhere," he finally said, voice low. "Everywhere we've stopped. These marks, they're not random." He turned the journal around so we could all see. The symbols were laid out in clusters, grouped like constellations. Some were connected by dotted lines, forming a crude geometric grid. "You think someone put these here to mark territory?" Dennis asked. Victor shook his head. "It's not for humans. Look at how they're placed. Around the cars, along the trees, they form boundaries, not trails." "You mean like traps?" Rebecca said. "No," Victor replied. "Like cages or wards, like something's being kept in or out." The SUV bounced hard as we hit a deep rut. Dennis swore and slowed to a crawl. The trees seemed closer now. The forest floor had shifted from a mix of pine needles and leaves to something damper, darker. There were patches where the ground looked blackened, like it had been burned long ago and never recovered. No birds called, no insects chirped. Even the wind had died out, leaving the branches frozen in place like they were holding their breath. We passed another abandoned car, this one almost fully buried beneath overgrowth. A rust-eaten Jeep, windshield shattered inward, roof caved, in as if crushed by something heavy. Rebecca took another photo, but the screen on her phone flickered just as she pressed the shutter. She checked the image. It was blank, just a black screen. "That's the third one," she muttered. "The camera app is glitching too now." "Use the Polaroid," I said. She nodded and reached into her bag for the analog backup. The flash stung the air, leaving spots in our vision. Victor leaned forward suddenly. "Stop," he said, voice sharp. "Right there." Dennis hit the brakes. We all stared ahead. There, barely visible through the trees, stood a structure. Not the house, not a shack. It looked almost like a stone marker, maybe 6 feet tall, rectangular, half swallowed by moss and ivy. Victor opened his door and stepped out before any of us could stop him. "Victor," I called, but he kept walking toward it. Rebecca and I followed. The air around the marker was colder, sharper. Victor ran his fingers over its surface, revealing faint carvings beneath the growth. More symbols, some familiar, some not. One in particular caught my eye, a circle with 3 intersecting triangles. It made my stomach twist. "This one's new," Victor whispered. "Or at least, newer than the others." "How do you know?" Rebecca asked. "No moss inside the cuts," he said, still tracing them. "This was carved recently." I stepped back, looking around. We hadn't seen any other signs of life. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to suggest another. Human had been here in decades, and yet someone or something had etched this marker after the forest reclaimed the rest. "Let's go," I said. "We're losing light." Back in the SUV, the atmosphere had changed. Rebecca checked the map again, then looked up. "Something's off," she said. We were supposed to intersect a fire road 20 minutes ago, but it hasn't shown up. Dennis frowned. We've been heading in a straight line. Have we? Victor asked, voice distant. We kept driving. More abandoned vehicles began to appear at intervals, cars, trucks, even a motorcycle, all stripped, all surrounded by trees, marked with the same arcane symbols. The deeper we went, the more recent. The decay looked as if time moved differently the farther we drove. At one point, Dennis pulled over and killed the engine. Listen, he said. We sat in silence, total silence, not just the absence of birdsong, not even the rustle of leaves. It was as if the air itself had been vacuumed away. The only sounds were our own breaths. I've never felt silence like this, Rebecca said. She didn't finish the sentence. I stepped out of the SUV, suddenly aware of how loud the gravel was under my boots. I took a few steps, forward, listening. Behind us, the forest stood still. Ahead, the path curved left, deeper into shadow. Then I saw something. Not a creature, not a person. A piece of cloth, faded blue, hanging from a low branch like a signal flag. I approached, carefully. It looked like denim, maybe part of a jacket sleeve. I reached out and turned it over. Stitched onto the fabric in barely legible thread were the letters JH. My breath caught. Jordan, Rebecca said softly behind me. Come look at this. She pointed to a nearby tree where someone or something had scratched into. The bark, not just a symbol but a word. Stay. Large frantic letters. Deep gouges, not carved with care, but desperation. I touched the marks. The sap hadn't dried yet. That was the moment I realized we weren't the first to come looking for Melier. And if the thread on the forum had any truth, we likely wouldn't be the last. But it wasn't just curiosity that led people here. It was something else, something that pulled you forward, deeper, no matter how many signs begged you to turn around. Victor stayed silent for the next stretch. He stared out the window, his pen idle, his journal closed on his lap. Occasionally his fingers twitched like they were remembering a shape, a motion. Eventually Rebecca said what we were all thinking. We're not on any road anymore. She motioned out the window. This isn't a trail, it's a path, but not a man-made one. Dennis glanced at me. I nodded. The forest had narrowed again, branches scraping both sides of the SUV like fingernails. Rebecca's map showed we should be close now, within an hour, if we hadn't already overshot it. But GPS was gone. Phones were useless. Even our internal sense of direction had started to feel as untrustworthy. Time dragged like syrup. Every minute stretched. Every mile took twice as long to cross. Shadows grew bolder, longer, even though the sun hadn't yet set. Then we saw it, faint through the trees, a sliver of empty space, a flatness to the horizon. The town's just ahead, Rebecca whispered, though none of us had said a word. And somehow, we all knew she was right. The trees fell away all at once. After hours of being hemmed in by dense forest and watching the daylight stretch thin between the branches, it felt almost violent, how the underbrush just stopped and opened up into space. The road widened into what could barely be called a clearing, the dirt path leveling out, the trees pulling back like a curtain at the end of an act. And there, emerging from the gold-tinged haze of late afternoon light, stood the first edge of Melier. We slowed to a crawl. The town didn't emerge gradually, as most places do. No signs of outskirts, no scattered houses hinting at density ahead. One moment we were surrounded by nothing but woods, and the next, rooftops and walls materialized from the veil of filtered sun. It felt staged, intentional, like a magician's reveal. The effect chilled me deeper than any sudden noise could have. There it is, I said softly, the words catching in my throat. We all stared. Melier was preserved, not pristine, not untouched by time, but intact, unnervingly so. Buildings lined what appeared to be the main street, their shapes defined by shadows stretching long across faded sidewalks. Storefront windows reflected the orange light like dusty mirrors. The town looked like it had been waiting. We rolled to a stop beside a warped wooden sign just off the road. I stepped out before the SUV had fully stopped, drawn toward it like it might vanish if I looked away. The sign stood on two cracked posts, sagging under its own weight, the paint flaking like ancient skin. Barely visible under layers of grime and weathering was a faded message. "Welcome to Melier, a community with heart." A patch of rot obscured the E, turning the name into something distorted. The population numbers had long since been washed away, leaving only a ghostly shadow of digits. Dennis had his camera out immediately, circling the sign with the reverence of someone filming an artifact rather than a relic. "It's like a movie set," he murmured. He wasn't wrong. The entire town radiated that unsettling perfection, the kind that didn't feel accidental. Main Street stretched ahead in eerie stillness, framed by buildings that seemed frozen mid-breath. Old vehicles sat parked along the curb, their boxy frames unmistakably late 70s and early 80s, burnt orange Oldsmobiles, faded green Pintos, rust-dusted Chevrolets. A thin film of dust coated their hoods, but their windows were intact, their mirrors unbroken. It was as if they had just been left there, waiting for their owners to return from the grocery store, the post office, a PTA meeting that never ended. "No. Vandalism," Rebecca said, walking past a diner window, her eyes scanning the storefront. "No broken glass, no graffiti. This place should be in ruins by now." I stepped up to the Oldsmobile nearest to us. The keys still hung in the ignition. A faded road map sat on the passenger seat. A crumpled cigarette pack lay on the dashboard beside a half-used book of matches. It looked lived in, like someone had simply stepped out for a moment expecting to come right back. Victor joined me, fingers trailing across the hood, leaving streaks in the dust. "Why would they leave everything?" he asked. "The cars, their keys, the food, the lights." The lights, that detail stuck with me. We moved down Main Street in a kind of reverent silence, as if making noise might wake something that preferred its rest. Each building was a snapshot of the past. A hardware store with metal bins full of ancient nails and tools coated in fine powder. A pharmacy advertising aspirin for 89 cents. A movie theater marquee reading, "Now showing, romancing the..." Stone, the letters faded but still legible. Time had paused here. We split up. Rebecca headed into a clothing store, its mannequins dressed in fashions decades out of date. Bell-bottoms and pastel blouses, the kind of outfits that had no business surviving the elements. Dennis filmed the entire street in a wide panning shot. Victor wandered toward a squat brick building with a cracked flagpole in front. I crossed toward Miller's grocery when I heard Rebecca call out, "Guys, you need to see this." We followed her voice into the grocery store. The automatic doors didn't slide open. They had no power, but the door was unlocked, like everything else here. Inside, the air was stale, but not rotten. Fluorescent light fixtures hung from the ceiling in dusty rows, and beneath them stood shelves full of boxed cereals, canned goods, detergent, and household products. It was all still there, every aisle stocked, every label yellowed but untouched. "No sign of animals," Rebecca said, pointing out the floor. "No nests, no rodent droppings, no mold." She pulled something from the counter, a newspaper, the Melier Gazette, July 14th, 1984. The front page headline read, "Unusual Wildlife Movements Puzzle Local Rangers." Beneath it, smaller blurbs spoke of power fluctuations and missing persons. "Same date on the bank sign," Rebecca murmured almost to herself. She carefully unfolded the paper and began reading aloud. Residents had reported foxes, deer, and birds fleeing the nearby Shawnee National Forest in droves. Rangers noted that the usual animal sounds had vanished. One paragraph stood out. Hunters report the woods are unnaturally quiet. Even insects seem to have disappeared. I felt a flicker of unease as the words mirrored what we'd already experienced. That thick, unnatural silence in the trees, it hadn't started with us. "Guys," Dennis called from across the street, "you need to see the bank." The First National Bank of Melier was set apart by its red brick facade, more modern then. The town's mostly wooden structures. Over the doorway, an old electronic sign still glowed with blood-red digits. 6:47 p.m., July 14th, 1984, 70 degrees. "That's impossible," I said. "That power source should have failed decades ago." Rebecca stepped up beside me, examining the wires overhead. "They don't run to the highway," she said. "They lead into the forest." I followed her gaze. The power lines converged into a tangled mass at the town's edge, disappearing into the trees like veins feeding something unseen. Victor approached from the post office nearby, holding a small calendar. "Same date," he said. "But look." Every day after July 14th had been circled in red marker. The circles weren't neat, they were frantic, almost manic, pressed so hard into the paper that they tore slightly. "A countdown?" Dennis suggested. "Or a warning," Victor replied. The sun dipped lower, the warm gold giving way to creeping shadows. Rebecca checked her watch. "We'll lose daylight in under an hour. We should set up camp." "No," I said instinctively. "Not here, not in the town." Dennis hesitated, then nodded. Half a mile back there was a clearing, better visibility, less claustrophobic. We began gathering our gear, loading cameras and bags back into the SUV. That's when the streetlights flicked on. One by one, in sequence, from the far end of Main Street to where we stood. Each cast a sickly yellow glow, humming softly. The light spilled across cracked sidewalks and empty storefronts. We froze. No one touched a switch. No generator had kicked on. And yet the town had lit itself up, as though it had sensed our arrival and welcomed us like guests who'd finally come home. Dennis swallowed hard. That shouldn't be possible. He was already filming again, panning slowly across the illuminated street. The town looked even more unnatural under the electric light, too preserved, too deliberate. A living photograph that never faded. We regrouped near the diner and discussed our options. The building was still functional, at least structurally, and provided better shelter than tents. But something in me recoiled at the idea of sleeping within the town limits. The thought of lying in one of those homes, beneath one of those untouched roofs, while things watched from the trees. It was unbearable. "We'll camp outside," I insisted, "near the forest edge, but not inside it." Victor was staring down the road, past the welcome sign. "Do you hear that?" he asked. We listened. Faint, almost below perception, was a hum, subtle and constant, like an old machine idling just out of sight. Or breathing. We left before the night swallowed the town whole. But as we drove back to the clearing, I looked into the rearview mirror. Melier remained where we left it, aglow, watching, waiting. Morning arrived, but it didn't feel like morning. The sun came up, at least we assumed it did, but in the clearing where we'd made camp just outside Melier, the light seemed filtered through something not quite fog and not quite shadow. It had that grey-yellow tint you see before a thunderstorm, except the air was still, and the sky above the canopy remained clear. Even the warmth that should have followed sunrise never came. The trees around us stood in motionless vigil, limbs, frozen, leaves refusing to stir. There was no dew, no birdsong, no rustling branches, no life. We broke camp quickly. No one said it, but we all felt it, an urge to move, to keep busy, to not be alone in silence. Dennis packed up his equipment in record time, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. Rebecca jotted notes in her journal, hands shaking slightly as she wrote. Victor was the last to speak. He stood staring back at the invisible line between forest and town, as if measuring whether something had crossed. During the night, "We need to document the residences," Rebecca said finally, her voice clipped and professional. "If this place was evacuated or abandoned, the homes might hold answers." I agreed. As much as I wanted to leave, we'd come here for a reason, and too many questions had already wrapped themselves around our minds. We crossed back into Melier with the same uneasy reverence we had the night before. But now in the daylight, the town looked changed, not decayed. Not damaged, rearranged. The cars we'd seen yesterday were still there, but some were now parked in slightly different spots. The burnt orange Oldsmobile was no longer in front of the hardware store. It now sat crookedly outside the pharmacy, its driver's side door half open. The mannequins in the clothing store, once posed in a stiff row facing the window, now formed a semicircle, their plastic faces turned toward the back wall as though watching something we couldn't see. It wasn't overt. It was subtle enough to doubt your memory, but unmistakable if you'd been there the day before. Dennis noticed it too. "This isn't how it looked," he muttered, scanning his camera. "The angles are wrong. The storefronts. They shifted." Victor didn't respond. He was already moving up Maple Street toward the residential area. Rebecca and I followed, while Dennis lingered behind, filming. The first house we entered was a one-story ranch with faded blue siding and wind chimes that refused to move. The front door was unlocked, of course. Everything here was. I pushed. It opened and stepped into a living room frozen in time. A floral couch, a thick wooden coffee table, a television with dials instead of buttons. Family photos lined the mantel above a fireplace, the kind of old portraits with staged smiles and soft lighting. Rebecca moved toward them instantly, her historian instincts kicking in. "These were taken in the late 70s and early 80s, she said, scanning each frame. "Judging by the hairstyles, the clothes, the Kodak color palette. The family in the photos looked happy, normal. A mother and father in their 40s, 2 kids around 10 and 12. They wore matching shirts in a Christmas photo, party hats in a birthday shot, paper pilgrim costumes in a blurry Thanksgiving snapshot. But something about them tugged at me. Not what was in the photos, but what wasn't. I couldn't explain it. I tested the light switch. The bulb flickered on immediately, casting a warm artificial glow over the room. My stomach turned. "How the hell is there still power?" I whispered. Rebecca didn't answer. She was staring at something taped to the refrigerator, a sheet of paper pinned beneath a children's drawing. I crossed the kitchen. The fridge hummed softly. Inside there were Tupperware containers, a carton of milk turned to sludge, and a bowl of what might once have been fruit. But what caught me was the note. "Do not go outside after dark. Great danger in town. Keep doors locked, windows covered. Leave town immediately if possible. They are watching from the trees." The handwriting was frantic, hurried, slanted sharply as if written mid-panic. Rebecca took a photo and slid the paper into a folder in her bag. In the adjacent bedroom, the sheets were unmade. The closet still held clothes, jackets hanging neatly from wooden hangers. A pair of slippers sat beside the bed as though waiting. The children's room was worse. A half-completed math worksheet rested on a desk. A backpack lay open on the floor. Toys were scattered across a rug in mid-play. The window facing the backyard had been covered in aluminum foil, taped at the edges like someone was desperate to block something out. "It's like they left in a hurry," I said, though the words felt inadequate. We found the same story in the next house and the next. Each one held variations of the same eerie domestic pause. Beds left unmade, food in the pantries, books open on couches, family photos on walls. But slowly a pattern began to emerge in those photos, a subtle transformation in their expressions. The earliest ones were full of genuine warmth, birthdays, vacations, prom nights. But by the early 80s, especially in 1983, things changed. People in the photos were no longer smiling. Their gazes shifted slightly. Some stared off camera. Others looked directly at the forest visible through background windows. Their postures grew stiff, their eyes uneasy. In one house, a 2-story colonial with green shutters, I found a thick photo album on the coffee table. The label on the spine read 1980-1984. I called Rebecca over and we flipped through it together. The earliest photos mirrored the others: happy families, barbecues, 4th of July sparklers. But as we moved forward in time, something infected the frames. By mid-1983, people had stopped looking at each other. In one picture, a father and daughter stood in the backyard. The girl smiled at the camera. The father didn't. His head was turned toward the tree line beyond the fence. In another, a group photo at a birthday party. 5 people out of 9 were clearly looking past the photographer, staring at something just beyond frame. Then came the album's final page, dated July 10th, 1984. The family stood on the back porch, rigid and pale, all 4 of them facing the woods with identical expressions of dread. Their faces were drawn, their lips tight, and all of them, parents, children, were staring into the forest like they knew something was coming. They were watching something, Rebecca whispered. Something that frightened them. Or something that called to them, I said, remembering the symbols carved into the trees, the power lines that led not outward but inward, into the woods. Victor appeared in the doorway. He looked pale, eyes wide. "Come see this," he said. We followed him to a house farther down the block. Inside, in a back room, he'd found a wall of photographs tacked in grid formation. Dozens of snapshots, most from inside the town, Maine. Street, the diner, the school. But each photo had a subject in common, a window. In every shot, the photographer had aimed the lens at a window facing the forest. "It's the same angle," Victor said. "Same lighting, same framing, as if someone was trying to capture something. And in 3 of those photos, barely noticeable, a shape. Not clearly human, but tall, thin, always in the distance, always partially obscured by branches. In one photo, a pair of pale hands could be seen gripping a tree trunk, the rest of the figure hidden." Rebecca began to tremble. "These weren't just families, they were witnesses." "To what?" Dennis asked, appearing behind us. I turned toward him, heart hammering. "We're not the first people to see them." Dennis lifted his camera and reviewed the footage from yesterday. One clip, filmed as we'd first walked into town, showed a reflection in the pharmacy's window, just for a frame. A tall, thin silhouette, unmoving, watching. "They've always been here," Victor said, barely audible. "They just don't want us to know." We all looked out the window. The woods stood still, but now we knew they weren't empty. We made camp just before the last light drained from the sky. No one said it aloud, but none of us wanted to sleep in the town. After everything we'd seen, the preserved homes, the eyes in the photographs, the writing on the walls, it didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt watched, occupied somehow, even if not by people. So we returned to the clearing about a quarter-mile outside the edge of Melier, the same spot where we'd slept the night before. It felt safer then. Now it just felt slightly less wrong. Dennis immediately began setting up his equipment. Tripods, audio recorders, motion sensors calibrated to trigger at the slightest movement within a 30-foot radius. "If anything gets close tonight," he said, voice tight, "we'll know." I nodded and helped Rebecca pitch the tents, keeping one eye on the tree line the entire time. Victor stood apart from us, his journal open on his knees, pen hovering above the page. But he wasn't drawing, not yet. He just stared at the town's distant lights, eyes glassy, like he was waiting for something to happen. "You okay?" I asked, crouching beside him. "Yeah," he said too quickly, his voice too light. "I'll take first watch." I hesitated. There was a tremble in his hands that hadn't been there before, and he hadn't spoken more than a few words since we'd left the last house. Still, I nodded. "Wake Dennis in 4 hours. No hero shifts." Victor smiled weakly and resumed, staring into the dark. Rebecca and I took the tent closest to the fire, while Dennis laid his sleeping bag outside, near his motion sensors. I lay awake for a while, listening to the stillness pressing in around us. No wind, no leaves, no crickets, no forest, just dead silence, thick and oppressive. My ears strained against it, trying to detect anything natural. But there was nothing, not even the occasional snap of a twig. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. I drifted into an uneasy sleep sometime after midnight. I woke to cold. Not just the ordinary chill of an outdoor camp, but a bone-deep, breath-stealing kind of cold. The fire had died down to embers, casting a dim red glow across our small campsite. I blinked, trying to orient myself. Something had pulled me out of sleep, but I didn't yet know what. I looked around. Dennis was asleep beside his gear, his face turned into his arm. Rebecca's sleeping bag rose and fell rhythmically inside our tent, but Victor's spot was empty. I sat up fully, heart already beginning to race. "Victor," I called in a low voice, not wanting to wake the others unnecessarily. No answer. I got out of my bag, grabbed my flashlight and stood. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating our perimeter, but no sign of him. Then I spotted something, a journal left open on the log where he'd been sitting. I stepped closer, shining the light down onto the pages. The last entry was a rough sketch of the town, but distorted. Buildings melting into trees, the power lines tangled, into spirals, symbols scattered across the roads like runes. Below it, one line of text. "They're calling from between the trees." I followed the soft impressions in the dirt, his footprints heading away from camp, straight toward Melier. No hesitation, no wandering, just a purposeful line into the dark. I should have woken the others. I should have called out louder. But something in me, a dangerous mix of fear and urgency, propelled me forward alone. I clicked on my flashlight, gripped it tightly and followed the prints. The town emerged like it had before, quiet, glowing faintly under the persistent orange-yellow streetlights that should not have worked. The silence grew denser the farther. I walked as though sound itself was being swallowed. Victor's footprints led straight down Main Street, passing the welcome sign and gliding between the buildings like a phantom trail. I found him standing in the center of the road, still motionless. His back was to me. His arms hung at his sides, his head tilted slightly upward, facing the tree line at the far end of town. "Victor," I said softly as I approached, "what are you doing out here?" He didn't move, didn't even flinch. I reached him, placed a hand on his shoulder. He turned toward me, but only his head. His body remained perfectly still, like a mannequin twisted at the neck. His eyes were open but blank, vacant, his mouth slightly agape. Little puffs of breath curled into the cold air. "Victor," I said again, louder now. "It's Jordan. Come on, let's get back to camp." He finally spoke, but his voice wasn't really. It was flat, toneless, like a recording. "They're calling from between the trees," he repeated. "They want to show us." Then the noise started. It began as a faint scrape, metal against pavement, a dragging sound. Then it circled. First, from ahead of us in the forest, then to the right, then behind. I spun, my flashlight dancing wildly over empty sidewalk and dark windows. The sound moved with impossible speed, orbiting us, getting louder, closer. Then it split, multiple versions of the same scraping, echoing from every direction. Dennis and Rebecca burst onto the street moments later, flashlights swinging, breath. "Ragged, what the hell is that noise?" Dennis gasped, reaching us. "I don't know," I said, gripping Victor's arm. "He was just standing here like this." Rebecca moved in front of Victor, trying to snap him out of it. "Victor," she said, her voice urgent but controlled. "Victor, look at me." She placed both hands on his face. The scraping rose, in pitch, morphing into a high-pitched whine that made my molars ache. Then it dropped again, a deep groan, low and resonant, not just heard but felt, like a vibration in the ribs. Rebecca shook him, gently but firmly. "Victor," he blinked once, then again, his eyes focused. "Rebecca," he whispered, confused. "What's happening? Why are we in town?" "You tell us," I said, stepping between him and the forest. "You walked out here in the middle of the night." The scraping circled again, closer now, faster. "We need to go," Dennis said. "Now." None of us argued. Victor was slow at first, like waking from anesthesia. Rebecca kept an arm around him while Dennis and I led the way back, following our own tracks in the dirt. The sound never left us. It stayed parallel to our steps, shifting around us like something huge and unseen, pacing our movements through the dark. "What do you remember?" I asked Victor when we returned to camp, huddled near the newly revived fire. He rubbed his face with both hands, shaking. "I was dreaming, but it wasn't like a normal dream. It was sharp, clear. There were things in the trees, tall things. They watched me, and then I was standing in the street." As he spoke, the sound changed again. It became rhythmic, a metallic cadence that almost mimicked speech. Not words, not language, but something close. Rebecca stared into the darkness. "What are they saying?" Victor swallowed hard. "I think they're trying to tell us what happened." The fire snapped. None of us moved. None of us volunteered to leave the light. We doubled the watch that night. 2 people awake at all. Times, flashlights in hand, eyes never leaving the tree line. The sound continued until just before dawn, never closer, never further. Just there, watching, waiting. Morning brought no comfort, only quiet. The fire had burned down to dull orange ash. The forest around us looked the same as it always had. Too still, too clean, like it had never been disturbed. No wind, no birds, no insects. Even the smoke from our fire rose in a straight column, like the air itself refused to stir. I sat with my knees drawn to my chest, staring at the pale blue light filtering through the trees, unable to shake the feeling that something had happened. Something subtle but irreversible. The night had changed us. It had changed something. Dennis stirred nearby, blinking blearily and rubbing his face. He'd fallen asleep during the last watch shift, camera clutched to his chest like a talisman. I didn't blame him. None of us had slept well. I turned toward the tent where Victor and Rebecca had gone hours earlier. Their sleeping bags were spread open, empty. Their gear scattered, flashlight, notebooks, Rebecca's pack. Everything looked like it had been dropped mid-motion. I stepped forward slowly. "Victor? Rebecca?" Silence. I unzipped the tent and looked inside. They were gone. I stood frozen, my pulse thudding in my ears. I scanned the clearing, expecting to see them walking back from the trees, maybe stretching, maybe just out of view. But no one was there. Only the dead forest, standing quiet and indifferent. "Dennis," I said quietly. "They're not here." He sat up fully, blinking harder now. "What?" "They're gone." He looked toward the tent, then around the clearing as if expecting this to be a joke. They went to use the bathroom or something, he said, forcing calm into his voice. Both of them. Maybe they didn't take anything. He looked again, saw the packs, the shoes. The realization hit him. We called their names, first softly, then louder. We circled the perimeter of camp, checked the nearby brush. No voices answered. No footprints trailed off into the woods. Then I found Victor's journal lying open on his sleeping bag. The last page was dated July 17th, 3:47 a.m. They're waiting at the tree line. I must join them. I know what happened now. What will happen? History doesn't repeat. It overlaps. Rebecca understands too. Beneath the writing were drawings, more detailed than ever. Thin, towering figures with featureless oval faces and elongated limbs, bent in unnatural poses. Their heads cocked slightly like they were listening, watching, waiting. Each one stood just at the edge of the trees. Dennis appeared at my side, eyes scanning the page. He didn't speak. His face was pale, drawn. Then he said, "Jordan, you need to see this." He led me to the edge of camp where his camera gear had been left overnight, or rather where pieces of it remained. His equipment had been disassembled, meticulously. Every screw, every lens, every board laid out in impossible precision. Spirals, concentric circles, triangles intersecting with strange geometry, like ritual symbols made from modern tech. "I didn't do this," Dennis said. "This would take hours, specialized tools, knowledge." I crouched beside the arrangement. The circuit boards formed the center of the largest spiral, surrounded by batteries like sentries. This wasn't random. This wasn't vandalism. It was message or a ritual or both. A few feet away I found their shoes, 4 pairs lined up perfectly, toes pointed toward the forest. "They left barefoot," I said. "Just walked in." We found the prints, 2 sets side by side heading away from the tent and directly into the woods toward Melier. No hesitation, no erratic steps, just a straight line like before. We followed them in silence. About 50 yards in, the track stopped. Just stopped. The final impressions captured mid-step. One heel lifted, the other sunken slightly into the dirt. Beyond that, nothing. No scuff marks, no evidence of running or struggle, just untouched forest floor. "That's not possible," Dennis whispered. I turned slowly, scanning the surrounding trees. Then I saw something swinging gently from a low branch, a glint of silver in the dull light. Rebecca's compass necklace. She never took it off. She'd said once it was her grandfather's. She wore it like armor. I walked to it. The chain was draped neatly over the branch. No sign of force, no broken clasp. Etched into the bark nearby were fresh symbols, concentric circles with jagged rays and crooked lines extending outward like malformed stars. Some looked newly carved, others older, worn by weather. They formed a crude perimeter around the spot where the prints had ended. Dennis raised his camera to record, then paused. "It's not working," he said. "Battery's dead. Was full an hour ago." We returned to town. We had to find something, anything. But Melier had changed again. The town still stood where we left it. But now everything was different. More wrong. The buildings looked like they'd shifted again. The hardware store's front window was now boarded. The Oldsmobile was gone. The mannequins had been turned once more, now facing each other in a perfect circle, arms extended as though they were praying. We checked the grocery store. The newspaper from yesterday was gone. In its place, behind the register, someone had scrawled a message in dark charcoal. "Time folds here." We searched the school, the diner, the post office, every place we'd visited. The photos were gone, the symbols were multiplying, drawn on walls, carved into sidewalks, fresh, intentional. In the school, every desk had been turned toward the windows facing the forest, as if an entire student body had been forced to watch. The principal's office, once full of documents, was now completely empty, not vandalized, just cleared, clean, sanitized of history. We met back at the diner, exhausted. No sign of Victor or Rebecca. No new clues, just more rearranged symbols, more curated decay. "Jordan," Dennis said, his voice low, "this place isn't abandoned. It's alive." I looked at the clock inside the bank as we passed it again. The glowing red numbers still read "47 p.m., July 14th, 1984. Time hadn't moved, or it had moved somewhere else, and we were stuck inside the gap it left behind. We stayed in Melier because we didn't know where else to go. The town no longer felt like a place. It felt like a trap slowly shifting its walls. We'd lost Victor and Rebecca without a trace. Their footprints had led into the forest and simply vanished. The message carved into the tree bark, the compass left like a breadcrumb, the eerie symmetry of the shoes. It all pointed toward something deliberate, intentional, but there was no trail to follow anymore. Just endless forest, silent and watching. Dennis. And I returned to the diner and sat in the same booth we had used the day before, though it no longer felt familiar. The seats seemed to have moved slightly. The angle of the counter felt wrong. The utensils on the nearby tables had rearranged themselves. Spoons now rested where knives had been. Coffee cups rotated with handles pointed inward like closed eyes. We hadn't noticed it at first. That was the trick. The changes were minor. Incremental, but undeniable. "I filmed this whole diner," Dennis said, setting his camera on the table. "I know what it looked like." He played the footage on his small LCD screen, except the diner wasn't there. The screen showed static, occasional flickers of light, then a frame, a tree, not a building, not chrome and tile, but underbrush and bark. The footage jumped, revealing a carved symbol on the side of a tree, the same circle triangle rune we'd seen etched into the school's walls and the bank steps. "This isn't what I recorded," Dennis said, his voice low. "I had 40 minutes of clean footage. The town, the sign, the streets. Now it's just numbness." He rewound again. More static, more cuts to forest, a flicker of the diner's interior, but only for a frame, like an echo of something that no longer existed in full. Then it blinked out again, replaced by a growing sequence of symbols. "It's corrupting the footage," I said, barely believing the words as I said them. "Or replacing it," Dennis replied, eyes wide. "With itself." We checked his camera's memory card. The file names had changed, random strings of numbers and letters. No timestamps. Some of the files refused to open. Others showed distorted images, trees collapsing inward, buildings melting. At the edges, looping figures that stood too tall and bent in ways human joints couldn't allow. Panicking, I opened my phone and scrolled to the photos I'd taken. Rebecca's notes, the handwritten warning in the kitchen, the newspaper from the grocery store. Gone Charlotte, each photo had become an unrecognizable mosaic of colors, pixelated into meaninglessness. Others had transformed into close-ups of forest floor, twigs, leaves, moss, things I had never photographed. Dennis looked up at me. "It's erasing everything." The sense of helplessness hit like a tidal wave. We had come here to document something unexplainable, something lost to time. But now that we were seeing too much, the town was pushing back, scrubbing us from its memory the same way it had erased itself from maps, from public records, from history. "It's not just hiding," I said. "It's curating." Dennis didn't reply. He reached for his backpack, pulled out the printed maps we'd used to navigate here. We laid them out across the diner's counter. On each one, Melier was nothing but a patch of undisturbed forest. Then, he pulled out a small paper map we'd bought at a gas station on the way in, one printed just a few years ago. Melier was there, but barely. A faint grey dot labelled only as Monsieur Pellier, like a smudge the printing press had almost forgotten to remove. That dot was now gone, literally. The ink had faded from the page. In the centre of where the town had been, only a faint white void remained. Dennis touched the paper, brushing the edge of the void with his fingertip. "It's rewriting," he whispered. "We're not supposed to remember it." We left the diner and walked the length of Main Street again. The buildings were still there, but off. The pharmacy window now displayed mannequins, not medicine. The bank's clock still read 6:47 p.m., frozen in the eternal amber of July 14th, 1984. But now, beneath it, someone, or something, had etched another message into the brick facade: do not follow unless they invite you to. It was written in what looked like charcoal or ash. I didn't need to ask. The handwriting was Rebecca's. Her distinctive upward slant on the T's gave it away. I folded the note into my jacket pocket, heart heavy with dread. "What does she mean?" Dennis asked. "Follow where?" "They want to show us something," I said, echoing Victor's words from the night before. That's what he said. The sun had started to descend, casting long shadows down the narrow street. We stood there, surrounded by buildings that felt increasingly alien, relics animated by memory rather than purpose. I realized then what had changed. The town wasn't deteriorating, it was adapting. Each structure, each room, each angle we revisited had been altered, not decayed, but deliberately adjusted. Furniture moved, walls repainted, windows relanced, a version of Melier that was just close enough to real to lull us. But behind it all, something else was reshaping it from the inside. We needed shelter. Night was coming again. And after what had happened to Victor and Rebecca, neither of us wanted to sleep outside the boundaries. Dennis suggested the bank. Only one entrance, he reasoned. Brick walls, no back windows, easy to watch. I agreed, reluctantly. We barricaded the front doors with a bench and a file cabinet we found inside. The light still worked, somehow. The clock above the counter still glowed with its looping timestamp. Forever evening. Time hadn't moved since we arrived. That night, we took turns keeping watch. I sat with my back against the marble teller counter, flashlight in one hand, journal in the other. I'd started writing everything down. Not digitally, not recorded, just ink on paper. The only medium the town hadn't yet tried to erase. Dennis lay across from me, camera in his lap, eyes flicking to the windows too often. Around 2 a.m., he looked at me and whispered, "Jordan, if it changes again, if it tries to rewrite us, do you think we'll know?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure anymore. By the time we stepped outside again, the sun hadn't moved. It still hovered low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of dying orange and lifeless gold, perpetual twilight. Dennis checked his watch and frowned. "It's been over 9 hours," he said, "but it's still the same time." We both knew what that meant. Time had given up pretending here. Main Street had changed again overnight, subtly but unmistakably. The post office had folded inward, half swallowed by the ground like it had been melting for years. The school had grown, literally, its windows now stretched 2 stories higher, and the sign out front had rewritten itself to read, "Class begins at dusk." We didn't speak about what that implied. Dennis clutched his camera like a lifeline, even though we both knew it was useless. His footage had long since stopped reflecting reality. The viewfinder showed trees even when pointed at buildings. It showed the diner while we stood in the bank. Sometimes it looped old footage we had never filmed. Victor sketching symbols into the dirt, Rebecca standing barefoot at the edge of the woods, her lips moving without sound. We walked in silence, toward the edge of town, thinking maybe we could still leave. Maybe the forest would let us pass if we moved fast. Didn't look back, didn't speak. But Melier had other plans. The road we'd come in on was gone, not overgrown, not collapsed, just missing. Instead of asphalt, there was forest. Impossibly, dense trees with trunks so close together, no human could squeeze through. The welcome sign, once cracked and weather-worn, was now pristine, its letters rewritten in looping cursive. Welcome back to Melier. Dennis stepped forward to touch it. The wood felt soft, wet, like flesh. He recoiled, cursing under his breath. This place is folding inward, he said. It's not a town anymore, it's a trap. We're running out of time, I whispered. Or maybe we already did. That's when we heard the voice, soft, feminine, familiar. Jordan, it called. Jordan, please, help me. It was Rebecca. Dennis froze beside me. No, he whispered. That's not her, that's not... But I was already moving. I pushed through the brush toward the sound, flashlight trembling in my hand. It was coming from the trees just beyond the gas station. Not the forest edge, not the road, the center of town. A figure stepped into the clearing. Rebecca, or something wearing her face. She was barefoot. Mud streaked up her legs. Her compass necklace was back around her neck, swinging like a pendulum. Her eyes were wrong, too wide, too still. Her mouth moved out of sync with the voice. Jordan, she said, you left me. I stopped walking. Dennis caught up, grabbed my arm. Look at her feet, he whispered. I did. She wasn't standing on the ground. She was hovering, an inch above the dirt, unmoving, like suspended on invisible strings. She tilted her head. We can still go together, she whispered. They want to show you, just follow. Dennis pulled me back. The figure blinked, then split. Two more versions of Rebecca stepped out of the shadows, identical in every way. Same mud-streaked limbs, same vacant stare. They surrounded us in a semicircle, and behind them, taller shapes. The long shadows, 7 or 8 in total. Towering figures with thin, elongated bodies and blank, pale faces. No features, no eyes, just smooth skin where mouths should be, where expressions should live. Their heads were tilted like curious animals, arms dragging beside them like broken limbs. They didn't move. They didn't need to. Their presence alone fractured the air. I felt it in my bones, like standing too close to a generator, the hum rattling through your teeth. Then Dennis screamed. One of the Rebecca figures had stepped closer, face contorting mid-motion, jaw cracking open too wide, eyes rolling back, until only white remained. She lunged, we ran. Not toward the town, not toward the woods. There was no safe direction anymore, just away. We tore down the middle of Main Street, past the diner, the school, the church, whose steeple now rotated, slowly in the opposite direction of the wind. The buildings blurred. The ground pulsed beneath our feet. I could swear I heard children laughing from inside the manhole covers, voices echoing like memories stored underground. We reached the field where our tents had once stood. It was empty. No tents, no footprints, just scorched earth and spiraling burn marks. The forest began to surround us again, trees bending toward one another unnaturally, closing off paths behind us, reshaping the terrain as if Melier was thinking, reacting. Dennis stumbled and fell. I yanked him to his feet, but he stared at something behind me, paralyzed. I turned. Another figure. This one wore my face. It mimicked my posture, my breath, my fear. But the eyes were gone, empty sockets filled with black, swirling ash. It took a step forward. I screamed and swung my flashlight at it. The beam shattered on impact. Not the figure, but the light itself, splitting like glass, fragments of brightness falling to the ground. Everything flickered, not just the light. Reality. The forest disappeared for a moment, replaced by static, by symbols, by looping footage of ourselves captured and replayed from angles we'd never filmed. We ran again, without aim, without destination. The last thing I remember is the sky splitting, a crack of thunder that didn't sound, like tearing film, like Melier blinking, and then blackness. I woke up in the middle of a parking lot, concrete, sunlight, the distant buzz of fluorescent signs and the tinny clatter of shopping carts. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. The air smelled of gasoline and fast food. Somewhere nearby, a car door slammed. A child laughed. I was lying beside a cracked strip of pavement, behind what looked like a strip mall, one of those anonymous roadside plazas anchored by a dollar store, a nail salon, and an abandoned radio shack. My mouth was dry. My limbs ached like I'd been beaten. I sat up slowly and stared at my hands. Dirt under the fingernails. Blood crusted along one wrist. My jacket was torn. A group of pigeons scattered at my movement. I checked my pockets. My phone was gone. My notebook. Gone. The only thing I had was a laminated tourist map, folded twice in my back pocket. M. Melier Recreation Trail. State Park Access Point, 12A, the town's name. Faded. Misspelled, as always. I stood shakily and staggered toward the main road. Cars zipped past me, and not one slowed down. My throat tightened with the realization. No one saw me. Or worse, they saw something else. I found a bench beside a gas station and sat there for what felt like hours, trying to remember, trying to anchor myself. But the memories were blurry, not just like they were fading, but like they had been rearranged. I remembered Dennis, his voice, his terror, his camera, but I couldn't picture his face anymore. Just a smear, a silhouette. I remembered Rebecca, but only as a sound, her laugh through static, a compass spinning in the dirt. Victor. Nothing. Just a name, a sketchbook with no drawings. The more I tried to remember, the more pain bloomed behind my eyes. I clutched my head, gasping. Symbols danced behind my eyelids, burned into the folds of my brain. Concentric circles, triangular spines, hands with too many fingers. I knew then I hadn't escaped. Not really. I went into a public library. It was the first place I thought of, where I could use a computer undisturbed. I needed to search to see if anything still existed. If the town had left any trace online, I typed Melier, Illinois into the search bar. No results. I tried Monsieur Melier Ghost Town. One hit. A cached forum post from 2006 titled, "Does anyone remember the town near Ridgefield that disappeared?" I clicked it. The post was gone. Only a line of red text. "This content has been removed for violating terms of existence." Stared at it for minutes, unsure whether it was a joke or something far worse. That's when I noticed the messages in the search bar changing. Typing themselves. "Do you remember her name? Do you remember your own?" I slammed the laptop shut. I stumbled outside and threw up behind a newspaper stand. That's when I felt the paper in my pocket again. The tourist map. I unfolded it, more slowly this time. Someone had written on it, in faint pencil, "Time doesn't repeat. It overlaps. You are still there." Below it, in different handwriting, "Do not write anything down. It can see." I staggered. Backward, heart pounding. A truck honked as it swerved to avoid me. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to move. I needed distance from whatever Melier was doing to my head, from the memories it was eating or rewriting or copying, maybe all three. I bought a burner phone with cash at a convenience store 3 towns over. I tried to call Dennis. No number. No contact. I couldn't even remember what his last name was. I tried calling my own number. It didn't ring. It didn't even exist. The phone buzzed once with a new message. We took what knew you. The screen shattered in my hands. No impact, no force, just broke, like it had completed its purpose. I was unraveling. I could feel it. My body was still here. But my context, my meaning, was slipping. I checked my reflection in a convenience store mirror. My face was still mine, but my eyes were wrong. Too wide, too still. I stepped back, heart racing. In that moment, I understood the truth. Melier wasn't just a town. It wasn't a place. It was a mechanism, a ritual site designed not to kill but to erase, to devour not bodies but records, identity, history. It didn't need violence. It needed witnesses. It lured people with curiosity, the call of the forgotten, the urge to discover, to film, to tell the world, and when they did, it rewrote the script. It plucked you from the film reel of existence and stitched something else in your place. You didn't die. You were overwritten. That's what had happened. To Victor, to Rebecca, maybe even Dennis, maybe even me. I pulled out a pen and tried to write in the margin of the map. My hand trembled. The words disappeared as I wrote them. The ink evaporated off the page, like the paper refused to remember. I stared at the map, heart sinking. I had one option left. I found a motel with a vacancy sign, paid in cash, and locked myself in the room. I dragged the desk in front of the door, pulled the curtains closed, and I started recording this, by hand, in a stolen notebook, pen and ink, because it's the only way the truth might survive. I don't know if anyone will find this. I don't know if the words will still exist by the time someone does. But if you're reading this, don't go to Melier. Don't search for it. Don't ask. Don't remember. Because if you do, it will remember you. It's been 3 months since I left the town that doesn't exist. At least that's what I've written on the wall beside the motel bed. Every morning, I cross out the last mark and make a new one. But time doesn't feel real anymore. It stretches and compresses like breath on glass. Some days I swear the same truck passes outside my window at the same hour. Same squeaky brakes, same fading paint. I don't sleep much. When I do, I dream in symbols, spirals, triangles, a road that ends in the sky, a forest with no beginning. Rebecca's voice calling from somewhere behind the wallpaper, Dennis screaming through the static. Victor's eyes, blank, reflective, recording. They've all gone quiet now, but I still feel them. Sometimes I see things move outside the window. Not people, just shapes. Tall, lean shadows that don't bend with the wind, they just watch. I think they followed me. No, I think I brought them with me. Some part of me never left Melier. The real me, my full self, is still standing on that broken main street under a sky that never changes, still listening to the same looping wind, still being watched. What came back is partial, a placeholder, a memory stitched together by whatever force governs that place. There are moments I look in the mirror and something behind my eyes twitches, as if it's not mine, as if it's waiting. For what? I don't know. Last week, I passed by a payphone, and it started ringing. No one else heard it. I answered. All I heard was silence, then the dial tone, then my own voice, whispering, "You forgot again." I dropped the receiver and walked until my legs gave out. I've tried writing down what happened. I've mailed letters to researchers, journalists, anyone who still believes in lost places, but every reply I get says the same thing. No such place. Some letters come back unopened, others vanish from my outbox entirely, like I never sent them, like the memory is contagious, and whatever it touches begins to dissolve, and yet Something always remains. A sketch on a napkin, a map with a smudged town name, a compass spinning in place on a windowsill. Last night I heard knocking. 3 slow knocks on the motel door. When I opened it, no one was there. But at my feet was a Polaroid me standing in front of the Melier diner, smiling behind me in the window, them, the tall ones, watching. I keep the photo under my pillow. I don't know why. Maybe as proof, maybe as a reminder. I don't think they'll let me go. Not really, because I looked too long, because I listened, because I remembered. And now, every time I close my eyes, they're still watching. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.